when we're doing the new thing, it's uncomfortable. There's no way around that for any of
Yeah.
us. There's a reason in our mind. I'm always talking about the subconscious and its pull, or it's kind of the pull that it has for us as humans to stay in the familiar. So anything that's new, even if it's logically a good, new, uncomfortable thing to do, positive being it's going to get me the result I want, it's still uncomfortable. And I haven't found any way around learning or growing without doing that uncomfortable thing.
Everyone, welcome to the Feeling Free podcast. My name is Ben, Dr. Nicole LePera. How in the hell are you?
I am so great, Ben. I'm so excited that we're finally getting in real time to have a person-to-person conversation. It feels like it's been a long time in the making. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. And this, like I told you before we recorded, this really does mean the world to me. And so first I want to tell you thank you on behalf of just first me, because you've been a great example of not only like within your content, but just watching you lead by example, and even in our communication of just like you truly like what you're teaching. I can testify to everyone listening. She's a great, you hold boundaries very well.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. And actually, thank you very emphatically to that boundary comment, because those of you who maybe have been following my work, maybe if you haven't, I'm here to share with you that boundaries were non-existent, quite literally in my life, in many of my all of my relationships actually, and in most of my professional relationships thus far. So boundaries are a new thing for me. So thank you for acknowledging the work I have been doing. They're not easy.
No, for real. And so when you do that still to this day, do you still get is your heart race, or is it easier now, or like what comes up when you're sending emails or verbally doing that?
Depends. I mean, there's different variations depending. I guess some factors that it would depend on, or how close is this person to me? How important, right, is this relationship, or is this request for me? Because that's the thing. We still might want to, in our relationships, have a limit or put up a boundary. So the boundary is, even if, we really care and want to be doing different in that moment, just because we cannot show up in any other way, or capacity, or our resources, which I think is probably a lot of what's happening in the collective now. We're feeling like our resources are being tapped out. So I say that to say, I might very well intentionally want to show up for this person, because I care very deeply about them, or about the relationship, or about supporting whatever it is. And sometimes we just can't. So depends. The closer the person for me, the harder it is. And I still do get, I call them the feel bads. I feel very terribly before I'm setting the boundary, when I'm setting the boundary, after I'm setting the boundary. But in a lot of scenarios, it has gotten significantly better. So especially with professional requests that are coming in, when they feel a bit more distance from me, or I don't maybe know the person, there's a part of me that still wants to be able to help everyone. And I also know my limits a bit more. So on those scenarios, I guess I would describe it as not maybe as feel baddy for me. So it does get a little easier. Those listening, with practice, you can settle into the process. And I should say, I've seen the benefit. So with that said, I've seen the benefit on the other side within myself, just feeling like I have more to give when I do show up for relationships, which makes it, even if it is hard moving forward, it makes it worth it.
I love that. That's so cool. And then, I mean, on behalf of the literally millions now, right? It's plural millions. For real, I know you hear this all the time, but thank you on behalf of the world. Do you ever just reflect and just go holy shit, what is this?
I can't even most of the time, Ben, wrap my head around it. if I'm honest, because it's big, it's bigger than me. I mean, it is the collective. Being such a part of it is, I think, overwhelming for most of us humans. For the particular human that I am, one of my really core childhood wounds, that's the language I use, my like
Mm-hmm.
hurt points in my childhood, was not really feeling like I was seen and heard for kind of who I was. Now, don't get me wrong, I was celebrated in a lot of ways. I was very academically and athletically gifted. So when
Mm-hmm.
I say this, it wasn't that I didn't get celebrated. I was seen in those ways. I was, touted for my success in those ways, but not necessarily as far as I felt it for who I was. No one really sitting and thinking about or listening to my ideas or my thoughts. So now that I have millions of people seemingly
Yeah.
listening to me, that little childlike part of me who desperately wanted that in childhood to be seen and heard for who I am outside of my
Mm-hmm.
accomplishments, while I want that so badly, there's
Yeah.
something that's so inherently uncomfortable about that. So when I now show up and I do try to wrap my head around the scope or the amount of people that are listening, it is scary as hell for that little girl inside. So
Yeah.
that it's so funny. We're so contradictory at times, even within ourselves. The thing that we want so badly is for some of us sometimes the thing that makes us the most uncomfortable. And I know you talk a lot about fear and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we can be so at odds even within ourselves.
For real though, like when was the last time, and I know you probably have a lot of examples, but when was like a monumental like fear that you've had recently or in the past, whatever recent history that you feel like you've truly like overcome or stepped into?
Public speaking. And public
Mm.
in the form of, well, I guess there's two levels of it. There's the public that is the virtual public speaking that I've been doing.
Yeah.
If we want to actually go back, and I sometimes do this, I go back to my earliest video. So video for me was a living nightmare at the beginning of this journey. I was someone who really didn't even
Mm.
like pictures of myself. If you caught me candid and I looked cute, I would be like, oh, cool, save
Post
it,
it.
tag me, right? But I was not the person posing for pictures. So just, kind of virtually putting myself out there and public speaking, because that's a version of it in a way, has been challenging all along. I
Mm.
think if we're honest, though, something about virtual and maybe only seeing a number in the corner
Mm.
dissolve that a little bit. Really I'm talking to a screen. Really, maybe there's one other person on the other side of it. I can
Yeah.
almost delete the fact of those numbers. So what I mean when I say public speaking is like when I've done an in-person meditation and hundreds of people have been sitting in front of me, are kind of the speaking engagements that are now coming my way.
Yeah.
So I guess the first one was the first meditation I did out here in LA before I was living here, where hundreds of people came to a beach and were now physically present so I could see the numbers. And that was scary as shit to me. I
Were
happened to be
you
doing inner child meditation, which was really appropriate. So I got to tell everyone how
uh,
scared my inner child was in that very moment. And then I walked through that fear and I did it anyway.
that's so amazing. I love that. So you were just straight up like terrified.
Terrified. I never spoke. I had never spoken on a microphone. I mean, outside of my little microphone that I podcast with, like a
Really?
microphone that blasts out the public. Never. That was the first time I brought it up to the beach. I plugged it in, and that was the first time I heard my voice on a microphone. I was scared, to say
Good
the
for you.
least.
That's so cool. Like I love that story actually. That's super cool. Do you reflect, like, so for you personally, how do you reflect on the wins and the progress that you've made, whether it's the public speaking thing or the boundaries thing or whatever else you're working on? Because for people like you and me and a lot of people listening, it's we're doing the work, we're like improving constantly. How do you like focus on kind of checkpointing that progress in?
Yeah, noticing it. I think that's a really
Mm.
big part of it. So when you're doing something new, it's really, really uncomfortable. And as far as I see it, while some of us like to visualize doing this new thing, and all of those tools can be really helpful in successfully executing the new thing. When we're doing the new thing, it's uncomfortable. There's no way around that for any of
Yeah.
us. There's a reason in our mind. I'm always talking about the subconscious and its pull, or it's kind of the pull that it has for us as humans to stay in the familiar. So
Mm.
anything that's new, even if it's logically a good, new, uncomfortable thing to do, positive being it's going to get me the result I want, it's still uncomfortable. And I haven't found any way around learning or growing without doing that uncomfortable thing. There's no way, like, I can
Yeah.
visualize all I want, but at some point I'm going to be in that situation and I'm going to have to show up differently. So teaching and living, like kind of just understanding the process of growing, it is through discomfort. It is through doing the hard stuff. And then when we're on the other side of it, I find incredible value and have always urged clients when I used to do individual client work to notice, because we get so used to ourselves that even if we've celebrated a win and we've walked through discomfort, we just kind of establish a new normal before we even realize it.
So true.
So before we know it, we lose sight of how far we've come. So I've made it a point in my own journey, and still do, to take those moments of, especially when I'm doing something now that is new and I'm noticing, oh, this feels a little bit easier this time.
Cool.
I could just keep it moving, or I could say, wow, there was a time when it didn't feel as easy, and just take that 1 second to celebrate the win of it. And I think that's really helpful, especially for people who are kind of constantly maybe having those wins for themselves, because before we know it, like I said, everything becomes our new normal and we lose sight of where we've come from. And it can be really motivating to remind ourselves of how far we've come.
Well, that's so true. I love that because it can be exhausting being so conscious. I think I've heard you saying that.
Well, there's a reason too. I mean, calorically, using that lobe of our brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. Those of you science people that are interested, but the short of it is, it actually needs more calories. Like, there's a lot of reasons why, especially because I talk a lot about consciousness. We're exhausted when we become conscious. I mean, from the most minimal, simple reason is you actually are tiring your body out in a new way. You're using more energy, to all of the other reasons why, of course.
But isn't that's so fascinating? And this is cool. I mean, excuse me, geez, my throat.
I'll take that moment to open up my bubbly water too. I didn't want to go while you were on here.
That'd be amazing. Why is my throat like gone? Anyway, okay. So we were kind of planning on, I mean, we just flow with it anyway, but I want to talk about shame, because as we evolve as humans, I feel like, and I'd love, whether it's personally or just your observations with the collective, like, is there typically more judgment on ourselves as we wake up? Like, do we judge our less woke selves? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we do it. I think there's two major pathways of judgment. Outside of, I'm going to throw out a big universal. A lot of us have some version of a critical judging voice inside of us. So more often than not, we find ourselves judging something about ourselves, more often than not positively. I talk about our inner critical voice a lot. I talk about all the kind of conditioned and experiential ways that we've developed it. But I say that to say that I find us humans quite critical of ourselves. So a big universal, I don't think, any of us doesn't have a moment where we're beating ourselves up. And the two moments, I think, are the kind of categories, patterns that I see in myself and the collective, is when we're unconscious, right? When we are living, because part of the reason I became so inspired to shift the way that I'm working is I started to notice a theme, a particular word or concept that was coming up in my clients. And when I looked at my own life, it resonated with me too. And that the concept or the word that I kept hearing spoken or described was this version of stuck, right? People who see themselves living these patterns, whether or not it's how they show up in the world or in their relationships or in their minds, whatever it is, that aren't serving them, right? So these are people that are living, I mean, the way I view and conceptualize it is that conditioning, that patterning is in that subconscious. They're in what I call autopilot. So they're not yet fully awoke. But there might be moments, right, where they look back and they see these patterns aren't serving them. And maybe they even kind of formulate the things that they would want to do differently to shift their life in a positive way. Yet they can't. And this is what I would see in my practice. So week after week, we would have conversations, right? Maybe from that conscious place of our mind. This is why I think therapy, I don't ever think that, I think therapy is an important component for many of us, but I think that we need additional tools outside of the therapy room. Why? So we come in, I could have a very insightful conversation with my client. We could even problem shoot. Okay, this is what we're going to do next time to break this pattern. Yet that next Tuesday at 11, I get a report of those same fights that are happening, right? really a lot of shame would come up. So in addition to frustration and, all the negative consequences that would come for that person based on that negative patterning, also would come a lot of shame, because why can't I do better?
They didn't make
Why can't,
progress or something.
I know better. Why can't I do better? Or maybe it's not even
Mm.
in a therapy room. Maybe it's just my friends are saying, hey, like, don't do that anymore. And I'm saying,
Mm.
yeah, you're right, friend. I shouldn't do that anymore. Yet I do it, right? Shame
Mm.
moment. So I think when we're living largely in autopilot before we really start to heal, that can be really shameful, because we are stuck. We're living this autopilot. Maybe there's a part of us that knows it's not serving us, but we own the responsibility. We take it to mean something negative about ourselves, or our lack of ability to change, we take to mean something negative about ourselves. I'm not worthy. I
Mm.
can't do it. I'm not lovable, whatever it is. And then another kind of, I think, pathway of shame comes as we begin to heal and become more and more conscious. We're now seeing ourselves. We're seeing our patterns. We're seeing our beliefs. We're seeing the way we show up in our relationships so much more clearly. And with that can come another, I think, wave of shame, especially if for some of us, we know where some of those patterns have come from, we can feel very, very shameful. On the other side of that, and this is what I urge, can come
Mm.
such empowerment. I think through both of these processes, the work is to kind of break that habit of owning it and to understand why we are stuck in the ways we're stuck, why or where our conditioning has come from, but also to empower ourselves to change it, because I believe that's possible for each and every one of ourselves. So to
Mm.
shift from, or evolve from, I'm shameful, I can't change because there's something wrong with me, to, oh, I understand why I'm stuck and I can change, and it has nothing to do with me.
Mm. That's super powerful. Would you say that's the differences you saw in your clients of the ones who shifted and who didn't shift?
That's the evolution. And I think there's
Mm.
no timeline, but that's
Yeah.
kind of where we go from. We go from a point of stuck, of lacking understanding, to understanding empowerment, to a pathway of how to change. So while the conditioning or the reasons why I'm stuck maybe weren't my response or weren't my fault, right? A lot of them, for a lot of us, developed when I was dependent. I was a young child. I actually couldn't do anything different. As far as I see it, as now an adult, it is my responsibility to find my way forward and to develop some habits that serve me better.
I love that. So you said responsibility. How have you seen, I'm curious, how have you seen any deflecting of responsibility of like with these tools of power? Because it's like, you said you are responsible, like, but it's not your fault. Like, do we deflect responsibility sometimes? Like, hey, like, this isn't me, it's you,
Yeah, I've done that pretty much my whole life.
Oh, wow.
I was someone who I call externalize, right? I found, whether it was the person, who wronged me, or the environment, that if it could be different, I would be happier. You know, I even went down to, so I share so often, and I share my story so often because I've lived this evolution. So
Mm-hmm.
for as long as I can remember, before I went through my own kind of dark night of the soul, birthing into my own healing journey, I was someone who, whether or not we were talking about how my physical body functioned, I believe that I was gifted or not gifted with certain genetics, and that would dictate my body's capabilities. The gift of my relationship history is I happen to have a partner right now who could not be more opposite in so many ways. So when her and I first met, she was a big challenge for me. So whether it was the way I saw how her body looked or how her body functioned,
Mm.
she was a moment where I would tell myself, okay, her life looks like this, or her body, whatever it is, she's like this because of something that's out of my control. So say, for instance, her genetics gifted her with this, and my genetics have left me looking like this. And this goes for the list really went on.
Mm.
So I was someone who just thought that there were certain things about my life that I couldn't change, whether, again, it was how my body functioned, whether it was my personality. I'm kind of quoting this. Really, I understand
Mhm.
personality as conditioning, but I believe that, oh, this is just how I was. I can't change that.
Mm.
I'm not joyful or gleeful. And this is my true story. Like, I
Wow.
thought I was someone who just wasn't happy often. I didn't have interest. I wasn't I told myself all of these scenarios, again, contrasting them with my partner. So I
Wow.
lived an experience of thinking I was limited, whether it was because of things that were just inside, really simplified, that were unchangeable, and or whether or not it was just things outside, right? This was the family I grew up in. So these things
Mhm.
were just how they were for me, or this is how I am and relate, right? How they were for me. So I did a lot of that, what I call kind of externalizing, kind of limiting
Mhm.
myself. So a big part of my journey was empowering myself. And I could tell you that I actually, when I say that I believe we all can change in any way, I mean that now, because I live that, because I'm not that person
That's so cool.
anymore. I've empowered myself to make those changes. I've seen those changes and I broke down those limitations because I've changed. So I say that and I share this. And when I talk about kind of living reactively, or feeling like the world is, impacting me in a way and making me powerless, I'm talking from the lived experience of feeling that myself and of coming to a place of greater agency.
Thank you for sharing that. Like, but Nicole, like we still don't like we see you, right? We see you now, and it's like how we can't get there. It's
Mhm.
like because we really do feel that, you know?
Yeah.
And so for the
Hmm.
people who listening who's like, she's a guru, she's an expert, like what would you say to those people? Like, no. Like
Yeah, no, I mean, and I got here through, anyone who listens to my work always is probably hearing me talk about this concept of small daily promises,
mhm,
because I would have thought the same thing. I did say the same thing about myself. I had no idea or expectation of what was going to happen when I went online. I had no idea that this is what the platform would evolve into. So we don't, it's not like I came on and was just like expecting this to happen, or that it even happened overnight. And when I talk about this healing, I assure you my healing did not happen overnight. And it's still, I'm going to be evolving and healing for the
mhm,
rest of my time here. So, I say that to say, with those small changes, it didn't happen overnight for me. I didn't come to this level of empowerment. I didn't, have all of these tools. And I definitely didn't use the tools when I had them, when I knew about them for a good long time. So,
yeah,
it's a gradual evolution. And that's, I think, one of the more difficult things for us humans, especially us humans that are suffering in any way. We want to feel better. Of course we do.
yeah,
So a lot of the times I do get people who, when the change doesn't happen fast enough, we use that as our further reasoning, or further evidence of our lacking. And that's, I
mm,
assure you, just not the case. So kind of piggybacking on what we were talking about earlier, notice making the small progress that is often frustrating, making those small daily promises, but noticing along the way. So we're not going to kind of come into what we want to happen overnight, but if we can, like you and I were talking about earlier,
mhm,
acknowledge our progress along the way, we can at least keep ourselves motivated to continue to keep those promises. So what I say to
mm.
those people is, I know I felt the same way, and you will be really surprised at how much you can, shift a lot of your life, all of your life, in those small ways each day.
That's awesome. And like I felt like a hint of almost like comparison. How for you growing up, I think I've heard you say that you felt like your life wasn't hard growing up. Is that true? Do I remember
Hmm.
that?
Yep.
So
Yes.
why did you feel that way even though you said because you name a lot of things of you were in a constant state of anxiety, like you weren't recognized for these things and like did you like why didn't you think your life was hard in quotes?
Yeah. So this is where the anxiety piece, I've known anxiety for as long as I can remember.
Mhm.
My family is a very anxious system. I call them a system because this is where boundaries comes into play and why I didn't have any of them. We were what is called in the field meshed or codependent, which really just means the whole system functions as one. So while there, for me and my family system was a mom, a dad, and a sister. I have a brother, but he was out of the system a bit
Mm,
more, right? While there were four individuals, quote unquote, we function as a system.
mm,
So when the system or one person was stressed, and I say stress very specifically because stress was our our family emotion that we typically felt. So when, say, mom was stressed, the whole family was stressed. So we kind of
uh.
roll. That's kind of what enmeshment, what it looks
And
like.
was she just stressed for just cause or like
No,
life?
so my mom has a long history of anxiety.
Mm,
Was raised with really emotionally unavailable parents, so was not equipped to handle it. She suffered a traumatic loss of her father when
Mm.
she was in her early 20s. And then my older sister, who's in that system, who's 15 years older than me,
Oh,
was
wow.
chronically ill. So my mother had a lifetime of health-related anxiety caring, exacerbated or made worse by caring for my
Mm.
chronically ill sister. And then 15 years later, I am now 37. So 37 years ago, right? My mother was 42 when she came to find out that she was pregnant with me,
Mm.
which made her really, and she was, Catholic, pro-life enough that there was no question that she was having me. But at that time, there was a lot of concern that I would be, in particular, they were concerned about Down syndrome
Mm.
diagnosis for me. Because back then we weren't yet sure about women in that older age having kids. Anyway, so long story short, I was raised with a lot of cortisol and adrenaline and all of the hormones of anxiety. And why this matters and why I share this is being ill-equipped, being dependent on my caregivers, my mother in particular, to help me regulate my emotions, having an emotionally unavailable mother because she couldn't regulate her own emotions because her mother was emotionally unavailable, right? So I'm just illustrating how this
Mhm.
goes back in time. She left me really alone, not ill-intended. She didn't know she was even doing it. She probably didn't even know I was anxious to
Yeah.
deal with my own anxiety. And when you're a child, that's completely overwhelming. But something else that we're gifted with as humans is incredible adaptability. So I made it work. And the way that my little child system dealt with something that was too overwhelming for it was it disconnected, or dissociated is a word that I think some of us are coming to know a little more in the collective, which just means I kind of distanced myself from my physical body where my
Mm.
emotions are housed, and from my emotions in particular. And something interestingly I heard growing up a lot within my family, they would always comment that, oh, nothing ever bothers Nicole. And
Mm.
that was true. I felt like, so this is where this comes in,
Okay, okay.
I had an easy life. That coupled with academics came easy to me. And
Mm.
academics, unfortunately, for some of us who had difficulty in schools, are a big part of our developing life. I mean, we spend the most of our time there. So that was easy. And I succeeded and I got good grades. And my mom, the person I wanted love from the most, celebrated
Mm.
me. So that felt easy. Sports became a new thing, another thing in my life that was quite easy. I was good, I was gifted, and I got a lot of accolades for being it. So before I knew it, I looked around. I have what we call a privileged existence. I never
Mhm.
wanted for anything. My mother, because she didn't know really how to love me emotionally, would give me the things I wanted. So I was spoiled in some ways. I got a lot of things. So when
Hmm.
I say my childhood was easy, it was because I looked around and I wasn't seeing, or, in my life, the things that I heard about that were really bad. I was so disconnected from my emotions that while I knew stress and anxiety, everything else I felt pretty okay about.
Hmm.
So that's why for so long, and probably up until I really began healing, you'll hear me you would hear me kind of pre-healing and post-healing talk about my childhood very differently. So the way I understand it is I would say my childhood was easy because it was in some ways, and because I was so disconnected from the rest of my emotional world to have felt the feelings.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And where were you in your journey where it became like, as you progressed in age, that it became like more difficult, or like where was that point where like that you felt like true resistance?
To what became more difficult.
So so childhood was quote unquote easy, and then as you aged, life became more difficult. Like, when did you notice that?
Yeah, I would say my early 20s. I
Mm.
had just graduated from college, and was living in New York City. And at that time, my mom, who was also chronically ill somewhat, she's had chronic pain, unidentified for as long as I can remember. Of course, I
Mm.
kind of understand that as part of her emotional repression,
Mhm.
all of it kind of is connected. She's always had kind of she's had heart problems, but nothing really serious. But in my early 20s, she was hospitalized and had to have a pretty serious heart surgery.
Mm.
So this health anxiety that for me, and really my whole family, was underneath the surface, was now more quote unquote real, if you will. Like my mom was hospitalized. So I was living in New York a very anxiety provoking city. For those of us who
Yeah.
are familiar with New York City and the
Uh-huh.
energy, right? I was just starting grad school. I was just out of college, which can be really destabilizing for a lot of us kind of on our own.
Hmm.
And my mom was having health issues. And there was probably about a good year in New York where I would walk the streets crying.
Oh,
I would be
wow.
having anxiety attacks. That's when I entered, actually, that's when I made the decision to enter the conventional medical system to try to treat my anxiety. That's when I started to go to therapy, and that's when I got on medication, the SSRI and the benzo medication to try and treat it. So that was a really big spike when things started to actually leak out symptom wise and
Mm.
feel not good.
I like I said, leak out.
Yeah, and then that became another, then I just kind of went right into, okay, well, this is that anxiety I knew I had. The things that I was complaining about too at this time, having no energy, kind of feeling always a little foggy. I need 12 cups of coffee to get through my day. Now
Wow.
I'm marching through my 20s before I know it, I'm nearing my 30s. And I'm not really surprised that I'm feeling that way, Ben, because all of my friends are too. So now I'm
Mm.
creating a narrative where, well, this must be what 30 looks like. I mean, shit, I don't really see many 30 people. I mean, I didn't have friends at that point that were in their 30s, like feeling great, So I was starting to compare myself with, I think, everyone else's dysregulation. I
Wow.
think a lot of us. So before I knew it, I just thought this was what life was. And I started to rationalize just under functioning in all of the ways. So I would say like once that kind of peak hit in my 20s, everything was kind of just stewing there for me
Mm.
until again in my mid 30 or early 30s, I should say, when I call it my dark night of the soul, when things really came crashing to a halt, when physical symptoms actually got scary for
Yeah.
me, and then that inspired my whole healing.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Like, that's, I love how you talked about, you thought that's just what it looked like.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And I think a lot of us feel that way because a
Mm.
lot of us are struggling with those same symptoms. And we do come to think that this is just how human bodies feel.
Because we're so adaptable.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so was it the medical issues that kind of like woke you up? Was that like for yourself personally?
Yeah. So what had started to happen was I started to faint, and I had never
Oh, wow.
fainted ever. And that's pretty scary. I don't know anyone out there who's fainted. It's really scary. And then the gift of fainting is you get fearful of fainting. So anytime you have like, oh, I'm a little bit dizzy, you think you're going to go down. I started to also forget my sentence. And that we all have a normal amount of, oh, I was talking and my mind drifted off. But there was a couple
Hmm.
times, one in particular, when I was in a session with a long-term client where I had, it's really hard to describe verbally, but it was the feeling of I couldn't normally when I forget my sentence, I can just like kind of grab onto something
Yeah.
else and like kind of like find my way out of it, especially if a client's in
Yeah.
front of me, you know what I mean? Like I was like, I'm like, oh, this time it was as if my mind and I could not like come up with a word, to
Wow.
the extent that I had to tell the client what was happening. I got all like kind of like flustered. I brought myself anyway. After those sort of symptoms started happening, I, as many of us do, especially those of us with health anxiety, I took to Google, mainly trying to, at this point, I was convinced that something was physically wrong with me because of the
Mm.
really physical nature of the symptoms at this point. And of course, I located it in my brain. So my first intention was, okay, something's wrong. What's happening? And then in my research to just give a name to what was going on with me, I really dove down some rabbit holes of what I was defining at that point to be some really important information that I had never come across in terms of the human body and the human nervous system and all of the ways that we could have or be suffering imbalances that are causing our symptoms. And that's before I even dove into kind of the psychological and the traumas and the wounds that many of us carry. My first, I think, evolution was, whoa, my body is really dysregulated and
Wow.
I need to figure out how to make some lifestyle changes to get my body to just make sure that I'm strengthening and making sure that I'm in the healthiest body that I can be in. The byproduct of making those changes, again, they did not happen overnight, right? I didn't just change my lifestyle and the next day my life looked totally different. I hated this. I mean, it started with, changing my nutrition a little by little. It started by, making my wake time a little bit earlier so that I could have a morning routine, and getting to bed a little bit early, right? So everything happened gradually. And this is why I'm so passionate about including the body in psychology and, mental wellness. When I started to get those things in order, I actually started to notice a change in how I felt emotionally around my anxiety in particular. And this is before I even dove into the whole world of, if you follow my work, inner child and all of the wounds and all of I did not yet even know I was enmeshed and codependent and boundaryless at this point. So, but that gave me enough hope and enough relief in my anxiety, and gave me some energy that I never felt I had back, that really started to highlight for me the importance of talking about the whole picture of being a human. The fact that we are a mind and a body, and in my opinion, a spirit or a soul, whatever you want to call it, that there are a lot to us that was, in my schooling and in my personal experience, not taught to me. And that's when I started to realize and have a really hard conversation with myself professionally, that I had to think about changing the way that I was working with my clients too.
Man, I love that so much. And you said that you hated it.
Oh my God. I went kicking. So back to that partner of mine. We joke, I call myself a turtle. And because I don't, when change is presented to me, I don't mind change. I'm not like someone who's like, no, I will stay the same my whole life. I'll consider it. But I joke, I'm like, I dip my toe in, I try it on, I tantrum a little bit. And then my partner is like, she will make the decision. And tomorrow, I mean, that joke about tomorrow, she will change and never go back into that old way. So it was very challenging in the beginning for our relationship, because we were healing, on or around the same timeline. And she was very much like, get up, like the alarm would go off and she'd pop out of bed. And I'm like, I hate you. I hate this. I'm not doing it. I'm running away. So it was definitely, I went kicking and screaming. And again, that's why I talk about it. So when I say I get it, change is hard, I get it. I spent so many mornings crying over, during my morning routines. I didn't want to be awake and I didn't want to be doing this. And, I didn't yet see the benefit, but I started to see it early enough along the way in small ways. Because I taught myself to look, that kept me going.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. So how long have you guys been in a relationship?
Her and I have been together for 7 years.
That's amazing. Right. And then you mentioned that you were healing together.
Yeah. So we kind of more or less around the same timeline, a little bit off, went through a dark night kind of separately together, and then both kind of which I am eternally grateful for. So anyone listening, if you don't have, a partner, or if your partner, because I get these questions a lot, well, what do I do if my partner's not interested or not going to heal, or, whatever it may or may not be, can healing still happen? And my answer is overwhelmingly yes. It takes you to do the internal work and change. And oftentimes the relationship itself can change. You don't need to have, someone else. I just know that I'm grateful that I had that someone else, because also at the time, I was living in Philly when, kind of my dark night happened, and I wasn't really feeling super connected to the relationships that I had there. I was starting to feel a little more disconnected from all of those long-term relationships that I was operating in. So so gratefully that I had a person that got it. And that was a big motivator, Ben, honestly, for me going online initially, was to connect with other people. So outside of my partner, who I am eternally grateful for, that her and I could speak the same language and we're coming to these understandings, I didn't have anyone else around me that got it, that were making the changes and that had this language. So when I started to consider, this virtual world exists and social media, like, how might I use this? My intentions were really twofold. The first was, I wanted to have a platform where I could start to speak about this new truth of holistic psychology, because I didn't see anyone else doing it. When you and I were chatting before this started, I told you I was floored when the handle was still even
Yeah.
available. I mean, that's really a testament to,
Yeah.
I think I probably got it a couple months before I went live, two plus years ago, holistic psychology, like wasn't even like, no one
So
even wanted
cool.
the handle of it on Instagram, like, cause it really wasn't a thing. So that was my first intention, is I wanted to start to talk about holistic psychology. I was fearful about how my peers in the field would react
I bet.
to this new thing that I know they probably didn't know about or
Yeah.
hear about before either. I feared that they would be threatened or think I was crazy or, trying to take business away from the system. And I'm
Did
not
that
doing any
happen? Did that
of that.
happen?
No, overwhelmingly, the response from my peers and other practitioners is overwhelmingly positive.
That's amazing.
I have, I offer individualized mentorship sessions, and I'll work with, different practitioners to update their practice or to talk social media, and I'll do all of that now. Eventually, I'm opening up a membership for practitioners, and I want to offer some coursework because I'm not going to
Oh,
wait
cool.
for the university systems to, kind of update. I want to start to get these tools out there. There are every now and again, a practitioner or two who have an opinion
Yeah.
about my work otherwise. So I'm not going to, paint a picture that, everyone's like rolling out the red carpet for me, but, more overwhelming relief, Ben. These are people who were feeling like I did.
The
It's
same way.
incredibly disempowering to be sitting in a room with an individual who, while I don't believe it is a practitioner's job to fix someone, that is the nature of the relationship, to
Yeah.
find healing. And
That's why they're there.
when both parties in the room are operating with limited tools, it's really frustrating to be that practitioner too. And I have a lot of ones that knew or had started to learn about their holistic world in their own healing, or had met different tools outside of their programs that were like me, that were like, oh shit, this is important. How can I use this? So positive. And then my other intention with going online was to find other people, to see if other people were healing, to find communities where people got it. Because I know, and I talk a lot about this, it can be really lonely healing.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons, because a lot of us we're just making different choices with our lifestyle. I mean, I'm not at the happy hour anymore. I can't even, concerts that start at 8 p.m. Don't see me in attendance anymore. Right.
Yeah.
That's different though. Like you meet someone and they want to go and take you to a concert and I'm in bed, so I mean, there's some like logistical things that make it hard, I think, for us to maintain those connections. Some of us reevaluate our relationships as we evolve, because we come to realize, right, that those ways of being that we used to operate in our relationships maybe aren't fully serving us. Doesn't mean we end them. It just might mean they look different or they feel different to us now. So a lot of us, for that reason too, are feeling emotionally lonely or are not able to talk about this deeper stuff to people who get it. So the gift of the self-healers community online, and I call it a gift, and a community that we've now all co-created,
So cool.
has been, we all have a space now worldwide, which blows my mind, that we can share the same language and relate to people in this new way. And that to me is the most inspiring aspect of everything that kind of has been evolving for me over these past 2 years.
I love that. What's been like a really cool story that has just blown your mind over the past couple of years? What's one that sticks out that's just like, wow, I can't believe this happened? Like whether it's a healing story or just something that you've heard.
I mean, everything that's happened just in my own kind of personal opportunity or professional opportunities has been mind blowing to me. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here now talking to you from my new place in LA, that, like all of this that has come to be, I'm just always mind blown that this is, what life looks like for me and the people I get to connect with and the opportunities that I'm given. So pretty much on a daily basis, I have those like wow moments in terms of the opportunities. The fact that I'm writing a book, I mean, Jesus, thank you. The list goes on. In terms of healing, I mean, I spend so much time, sometimes meeting messages and comments. I chills. I could get chills from some of the content and the contact, I should say, that I get from people, the messages of their own healing journey, the journeys that start. I always highlight one of my community members named Allie, because she is such an inspirational story. She started a healing journey based on a small daily promise. So those small promises that I was talking about earlier, of 1 glass of water. And she has quite
Wow.
literally healed physical symptoms that she was struggling with. She's cultivating a new singing career. She's had some new
Whoa.
relationship opportunities. I mean, so from 1 glass of water, as I was saying earlier,
Wow.
this is a human who she's still healing. You know, she's still, like all of us, has a lifetime of a journey to go. But
Mhm.
I like to bring her up because I really like to illustrate there is no promise that's too small to get you motivated toward change. Because for her, it was a glass of water, and watching the change that has come from that is mind
Wow.
blowing.
That's so cool. Like, so was she not drinking water before?
I guess she didn't drink enough water as she thought she wanted to. It was like kind of like, I
Yeah.
guess I think it for her was captured in this idea of a morning routine. So it
Yeah.
was twofold. It was, I'm going to wake up, and the first thing I'm going to do, maybe before I even go on my phone, is have a glass of water. So it's
Right.
probably like she needed a little water, and I think she wanted like the first thing to do in the morning, because that's helpful. Again, I hated mornings. If you ask my dad about me in high school and mornings, the wars that my household had
Wars.
seen in
Mhm.
mornings because I did not do well with them. We'll just leave it
Mhm.
at that. So, but I understand now, for me, mornings, the first choice I make when I open my eyes, if it's a choice for me, where I'm meditating or doing breath work or journaling, right? Something that's for me is going to shift the way I enter my day, as opposed to if I wake up and I'm answering that email. Because now I've already allowed something outside of me
Yep.
to possibly dictate how I feel or how I enter in my day. So I've learned the value, in addition to the fact that I can get a lot of thinking and creativity done for me in the mornings before my day kind of goes elsewhere. But I think there's something special about the choice that we make. And if we do make a choice for us first thing, that can really, really go a long way of how we enter our day.
That's amazing. That's cool. Like, so for you, you kind of mentioned it a little bit. Like, when do you feel like the most free? What does that mean to you? Like, what does
In
freedom mean in your life?
Um, I love that, because you know what, Ben? Freedom has been a word that has resonated for me
Mm.
as long as I can remember. I probably have lived most of my life feeling the farthest thing from free,
Wow.
but it's all I've ever desperately wanted. So freedom for me means the agency or the ability to have a choice and to make whatever choice it is. So whether or not it's like, oh, I like this thing and I want to buy it, you know, do I have enough financial freedom to buy the thing without, you know, causing myself undue stress? Or can I choose how I want to spend my time in this
Yeah.
moment? Do I have time freedom, or is that dictated by something outside of myself? Am I free from just internal distraction? Can I find that freedom? That sometimes that we don't self-generate that, but we choose to, you know, engage with the moment that's happening. So for me, freedom has so much, but for me, it's choice. It's having the empowerment to be able to say, this is what I want in this moment, as opposed to this is what I should do, or I have to do,
Mm.
or I feel compelled to do, or I have no choice but to do. It's really, I think, choice.
I love that. What else like is on your heart right now? Like, what do you feel compared or inspired to share for people who may be stuck or less free or don't have choice?
Yeah. I mean, I just see, because I found in myself that empowered space, you know, I just want to, my message and on my heart to everyone, especially particularly those who don't feel that they were given the gift of this empowerment, that I assure you it's in there, that we can
Hmm.
build in habits, small ones that maybe start with a glass of water each day, where we can start to shift and gain our power back. Because so many of us feel so disempowered, so powerless, have quite honestly been living a very reactive life. A lot of us have. I mean, when we feel a victim, if you will, to the environment, there's a reality in that, because we are, because things are happening around us and our choices are being made for us by that subconscious.
Yep.
So we've actually removed us in many ways from the equation. So people out there that are feeling disempowered, that are feeling like there is no path back to having agency or gaining that choice that I'm talking about, I assure you there is. And it starts so
Mm.
small, but the momentum that can be built is life changing.
I love that. And like, for real, for me just to echo, like, you truly are powerful.
Yes.
Like, for real, it's scary.
We're
It's,
creators. And that's real. I mean, that fear, Ben, a lot of
hmm
us don't step into our power because
Yeah.
it's scary as hell.
It is
And I'm the
scary.
first to tell you, I'm scared as hell sometimes, like we talked about in the beginning. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
scared as hell. And as I continue to evolve and get new opportunities, I'll still talk about how scared I am. It's scary to step into our power, to acknowledge that we are creators. So thank you for acknowledging,
Mm-hmm.
I think, the inherent fear that sometimes, or that often, comes within our power.
I love that. Like, Dr. Nicole, thank you so much. Like this, I mean, you're amazing, but this is a special episode for me, personally, but also this is the very first episode. So it's like this is like a historic moment. So thank you so much for like sharing your time, your heart, your energy, and yeah, you're truly awesome. And I mean that.
Thank you so much. I am truly honored to be a part of this historic opportunity. And Ben, I reflect that right back to you. The work that you're putting out, the
Mhm.
way you're showing up in the world, you're truly awesome, and you're changing so many lives. So this, like I said, is beyond my honor. You're making some changes, for helping people make some changes, and that's a gift.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, everyone. Actually, before we go, what is your membership, your self healer circle that opens really soon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my main hub is the .holistic.psychologist over there on
Mhm.
Instagram. You will hear every fun thing that we're doing. And the latest is, yes, so May 1st, we launched the new membership with founding members on November 1st of last year, which is crazy. So thank you all my founding members that might be listening out there. They have been very graciously helping to co-create the virtual healing space that is the Self Healer Circle. So we're feeling ready, and we're going to open up for enrollment again on, I think it's a Friday, May 1st, 9
Awesome.
a.m. So anyone who's interested, head over to the Instagram. You can get all information on there. There is a email list that you can jump on and be alerted when enrollment happens, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the latest, and the behind the scenes that I am working on in terms of another big project that I'm super excited about, is the book. So I'm writing a book. We're anticipating a spring 2021 release date. So again, I've been doing, which is really cool, a lot of behind the scenes,
Yeah.
in terms of book writing on the Instagram. So anyone who's interested in following along with my nervous breakdowns now as a writer, please
Yeah.
come and follow. There are also a lot of highlights as well. But yeah, I often shout out the Instagram, because that's the way to keep abreast with everything that's happening.
Well, yeah, and you're engaging people so they can actually help you write it, which
Mhm.
is that's like a
Cool.
unique opportunity
Yeah.
to like
Yeah, it's
literally
really cool.
like you are like as a follower, it's like, yo, I can go to this thing and help write a book. That's dope.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Nicole, thank you so much. You're amazing. Adios.
Thank you.